That gray bucket of ash sitting by your fireplace, you were about to carry it to the trash. Stop. In my village in Nagano, we never threw it out. We called it the second harvest. One pail of cold wood ash does the work of 4 things you are paying good money for right now: garden lime, fertilizer, slug killer, even the cleaner under your kitchen sink. My grandfather never bought a single one of them. Neither did his father before him. The garden centers would rather you never hear what I am about to tell you. And before this is over, I will show you what my grandmother did with 1 handful of ash and a black iron pot. The thing almost no one outside our old farmhouses still remembers. But first, tell me one thing down in the comments. Do you burn wood at home, a fireplace, a wood stove, a fire pit out back, or none at all? One word is enough. I still see them, even now. A cold morning, white frost on the rows. My grandfather walking the cabbages before the sun came up, a dented tin pail swinging from his hand. Hold that picture. I will come back to it. Let me start with the thing he did every autumn, the thing I did not understand until I was a grown man. When the harvest was finished and the cold came down off the mountains, my grandfather would take the ash from our hearth, we called the sunken hearth, the Irori, and he would carry it out to the fields by the bucketful. He spread it thin, like a man feeding chickens, walking slow, his wrist flicking. As a boy, I thought he was just emptying the fireplace somewhere out of the way. I was wrong. He was doing something the modern world now sells you in a heavy plastic bag for real money, and he was doing it for free. Here is what is happening, and it is simpler than the stores want it to sound. When wood burns, the part of the tree that floats away as smoke is gone. What stays behind in that gray powder are the minerals the tree pulled up out of the ground over its whole life. The biggest one is calcium, and it is in a form that behaves almost exactly like garden lime. Soil that has been gardened for years, soil that gets a lot of rain, slowly turns sour to acidic, and when it does, your plants stop being able to drink up the food that is already sitting right there in the dirt. They starve at a full table. Lime sweetens that sour soil back to where roots can feed again, and wood ash does the very same job. This is not an old man's story. Oregon State University Extension measured it. They found wood ash has about half the neutralizing power of agricultural lime, pound for pound. Penn State Extension says the same, that wood ash can replace lime, and that a healthy backyard garden can take somewhere around 15 to 20 pounds spread over 1,000 square feet in a year. Half the strength of the bag they sell you from the bucket you were about to throw away. So here is exactly how you do it, the way he did. Use only ash from clean, untreated wood, your fireplace, your wood stove, a fire pit where you burn real logs. Never ash from painted wood, pressure-treated lumber, charcoal briquettes, or trash. Let it cool completely. Spread it thin on the soil in late fall or early winter when the beds are resting, and let the rain and snow carry it down. A coffee can full sprinkled over a garden bed is plenty. Then turn it in lightly or just let it sit. But here's the one thing you must remember, because it is the same warning my grandfather gave me. Not every plant wants sweet soil. The ones that love sour ground blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, your evergreens, keep ash far away from them. And do not dump a thick pile in one spot, ever. Because too much in one place will swing the soil too far the other way and burn your plants instead of feeding them thin and even. Always thin and even. Now, you may be thinking that lime is cheap enough, so why does this matter? It matters because lime was only the first thing in that bucket. Because the same gray powder is also hiding a fertilizer the stores charge the most for of all. That is the part my grandfather never said out loud. He just knew his tomatoes came in sweeter than the neighbors, and his flowers stood up straighter in the wind, and he could not have told you the chemistry of why. I can tell you now, inside wood ash, along with that calcium, is potassium. The old gardeners call it potash, and if you look at the word potash, it's literally potash, because people once made it by soaking ash in pots. Potassium is one of the 3 big things every fertilizer bag brags about. It is the one that builds strong stems, helps a plant fight off cold and disease, and most of all, it is the one that controls sugar and water inside the fruit. It is the reason a tomato tastes like something instead of tasting like nothing. Wood ash runs somewhere between 3 and 7% potassium depending on the wood. Hardwoods like oak and maple carry the most. There is a little phosphorus in there too, around 1 to 2%, and a great deal of calcium, often around 20% or more. So that single bucket is not just lime. It is lime and potassium and calcium all at once, the exact things you walk into a store and buy in 3 separate bags with 3 separate prices. Think about that for a moment. An entire industry is built on selling you separately and expensively what one fire in your own home produces for nothing. They are not lying to you about what is in the bag. They are simply counting on you never finding out you already make the same thing every time you stay warm in winter. To use it as fertilizer is easy. In the spring, before you plant, sprinkle a light dusting of cooled ash over the bed and rake it in. Around tomatoes, peppers, and your flowering plants, a small handful work gently into the soil around each plant once early in the season is enough. Around fruit trees and berry bushes that like sweeter soil, scatter it out under the branches where the rain falls. The potassium dissolves and travels down to the roots over the following weeks. 2 warnings, because I would be a poor neighbor not to give them. Keep ash away from your potato patch. Sweeter soil can encourage a skin disease on potatoes called scab. And my grandfather kept his ash and his potatoes well apart. And never put fresh ash right against seeds you've just planted or tiny seedlings. It is strong and young things are tender. Give it space, give it time. Now we have lime and we have fertilizer, both from the same free bucket. But I told you my grandfather walked the cabbages before sunrise with a tin pail. I have not told you why. And the why is the thing that once you see it, you will never look at a slug the same way again. Let me take you back to that frost white morning. I asked him once, shivering, why we had to be out so early. Why not after breakfast when the sun was up? He did not answer in words. He just crouched by a cabbage, parted the outer leaves with one finger, and showed me. The night slugs and snails had been at it, the silver trails, the chewed holes, the ragged edges. Then he stood, reached into the pail, and ran a thin gray ring of ash all the way around the base of each plant, and a fine dusting across the lower leaves. He did it at dawn, he explained, because the ash had to be dry, and the dew had to be nearly gone, and the slugs were retreating for the day. He was sealing the door behind them. Here's why it works, and it is almost cruel in its simplicity. A slug and a snail move on a body of soft, wet skin. Dry wood ash is fine and powdery and slightly caustic. It pulls the moisture right out of that soft skin and is rough and drying to crawl across. To a slug, a ring of dry ash is a ring of fire. They will not cross it. So while the world sells you little blue pellets and tubs of poison and copper tape by the foot, my grandfather drew a line in gray powder and the cabbages were whole. The trick, and this is the part the back of no product box will teach you, is that it only works while it is dry. The morning dew or the first rain washes the power right out of it. So you lay your ash ring in the morning after the dew burns off, or on a dry stretch of days, and you refresh it after rain. It is not a spread it once and forget it poison. It is a small repeated habit, the way the old work always was. A coffee can and 5 quiet minutes at the start of your day. And that same dry dusting does one more thing. A light coat of ash on leaves troubled by powdery mildew, that white dusty film that shows up on squash and cucumbers and roses in late summer, changes the surface to something the fungus does not like to grow on. A thin dusting, not a burial. Enough to see the gray, not enough to smother the leaf. My grandmother did this to the squash along the south fence. And I remember thinking the leaves looked like they had been touched by frost in July. So there's your sunrise mystery. Finished. The pail. The frost. The slow walk. He was not just emptying the hearth. He was running the whole pest aisle of a garden store out of one bucket. And he was doing it before most people were awake. But maybe right now you are sitting there thinking this is all very nice for a man starting a fresh garden in good mountain soil, and that your yard is already planted, already established, the bed's already full, the tree's already grown. Maybe you think it is too late for you to bother. I want to speak to you directly because you are exactly the person who gains the most. And almost everything you have heard so far was aimed at fresh dirt. This part is for the established yard. You do not need to tear anything up. You do not need to start over. You do not need to buy one single thing. This weekend, if your beds are already planted, here's what you do. Take a coffee can of cooled ash and walk your garden the way my grandfather walked, his slowly, with your wrist doing the work. Around your established perennials and your roses, scatter a thin ring on the soil out where the leaves reach, the area we call the drip line, and let your normal watering carry it down to the roots. That is side dressing, and it feeds plants that are already in the ground without disturbing a single root. Around your mature fruit trees, the apples and the pears, broadcast a light scattering under the canopy. Those trees are hungry for potassium and calcium, and a yearly dusting helps the fruit set firm and sweet. On your lawn, if it has gone mossy and sour in the shady spots, a very light sprinkle of ash, watered in, sweetens that soil the way lime would and discourages the moss, because moss loves the sour ground that ash undoes. And along the edges of beds you already have, lay your dry slug ring tonight after the dew lifts tomorrow, and watch the morning after. Nothing here asks you to dig up your life. The old ways were never about starting over. They were about working with what is already there, one quiet handful at a time. That is the whole spirit of it. Montanai, we call it. The simple shame of letting something useful go to waste. Your established yard is not a problem to be fixed. It is a table already set. just waiting to be fed. And if you want to go deeper into these methods, not just ash, but the full system my family used across every season, every corner of the home and the land, I have put it all into a book called The Japanese Home Method. Everything that could not fit into one video, every protocol we followed, every quiet technique the old farmhouses carried and the modern world forgot, it is there, written out the way a neighbor would explain it, step by step. You will find the link in the description below. It is called The Japanese Home Method, and it is the closest thing I know to sitting down beside the Aurori and having it handed to you properly. And the longer you live with that idea that the answer is usually already in your hands, the more you start to wonder what else they sold you that you never needed. Which brings me finally to the iron pot, to my grandmother, to the thing I promised you at the very beginning, the thing almost no one outside our old house still remembers. I need to take you all the way back into the kitchen now, to the Aurori, the sunken hearth in the floor where the fire burned and the big black iron pot hung on a hook above it. The pot was heavy and old and it cooked everything we ate. And every few days my grandmother would clean it. And she did not reach for any bottle or any powder you would recognize. She reached down into the cold ash at the edge of the fire pit. I watched her do it 100 times and never once asked why. The way children never ask about the things that are simply always true. She would take a handful of the fine cold ash, wet her cloth, and scrub the iron and the grease and the burnt rings until they lifted away clean. Then for the glass, for the few precious pieces of glass we owned, and the oil lamp chimneys gone yellow with soot, she would mix a little ash into water, let the gray settle, and use the cloudy water on top with a soft rag. The glass came up clear. The grease came off the pot, and we never, not once in my whole childhood, bought a thing to make it happen. I did not understand until I was much older, and when I finally did, I felt almost foolish and then almost angry, because here is a secret, and it is real, and you can do it this very weekend. When you mix wood ash, especially hardwood ash, with water, you do not just make a gray paste, you make lye. The water pulls the potassium out of the ash and becomes alkaline, soapy, slippery, a natural degreaser. This is not a quaint old wives' tale. This is the actual origin of soap. For centuries, before there was a single bottle on a single shelf anywhere in the world, people made their soap by soaking hardwood ashes in water to draw out the lye, then combining that lye water with fat. The word potash we spoke about earlier, the potassium fertilizer, is the very same substance. The thing that feeds your tomatoes is the thing that cleans your pots. It was always the same gray powder. Doing two jobs, the modern store splits into two aisles and two prices. So here is exactly what my grandmother did and what you can do. For a tough, greasy pan or a crusted oven rack, take a small handful of cooled sifted wood ash, add just enough warm water to make a thick paste, and use it as a gentle scouring cream with a cloth or sponge. The fine ash is a mild abrasive, and the lye it forms cuts the grease, the same two-part attack as the expensive cream cleansers made from your fireplace. For glass and grimy windows, stir a couple of spoonfuls of ash into a jar of warm water, let it stand until the grit sinks to the bottom, and use the clear, cloudy water on top with a soft rag, then buff dry. It lifts soot and greasy film and leaves the glass clear. One sensible word, because lye is strong, and I want you safe. Wear a pair of rubber gloves, because that same power that strips grease can dry your skin and keep it well away from your eyes. Test it on a small spot first. Treat it with the same plain respect you would give any cleaner. My grandmother had rough, strong hands, and she knew exactly how much to use. You will learn the feel of it in one afternoon. Sit with that for a moment. The cleaner under your sink, the scouring powder, the glass spray, the degreaser. Somewhere in your house right now is money spent on a bottle that does what a handful of cold ash and a jar of water has done for 1,000 years. They did not invent something better. They invented something to sell, and then they made sure you forgot you ever had it. That is the whole trick of it, start to finish. An entire shelf of products, standing in for one free thing that falls out of every fire you light. This is why I sit here and tell you these things. Not because the old ways were poor, and we knew no better, because the old ways were rich in a way that costs nothing, and that richness is being quietly carried off, bag by bottle by bag, while we are told we cannot manage without it. My grandfather is gone. My grandmother's gone. The Aurori in that farmhouse is cold now. But the knowledge does not have to go cold with them, because I am handing it to you here tonight the same way it was handed to me across a frost-white field beside a black iron pot, one quiet handful at a time. You did not lose this knowledge by accident. It was taken from you, slowly, by people who profited every time you reached for your wallet instead of your woodpile. And tonight you took a piece of it back. That is who you are, someone who refuses to keep overpaying for what nature and the old ways already hand you for free. So tell me again down in the comments, the way I asked at the start, Do you burn wood at home, a fireplace, a wood stove, a fire pit, or none at all? Tell me, because I read them, and because I want to know how many of you are sitting on a second harvest you have been carrying to the trash. Leave the comment. One word is enough. And if something in this reached you, if it sounded less like a stranger selling you something and more like a neighbor handing down what his people knew, then stay with me. This is not a channel. It is a small circle of us recovering the time-tested ways the old farming cultures never threw away. Because next time, I am going to show you the one thing my grandmother kept buried in a clay crock in the cool dark under the floor. The simple method we use to keep vegetables crisp and good through the whole long winter with no electricity, no freezer, and nothing you would have to buy. I will be waiting for you there. Bring your bucket of ash. We are only just getting started. Before you go, let me give you one more thing. Because a neighbor never sends you home empty-handed when there is still room in your basket. That same gray powder did quiet work in our home that had nothing to do with the garden at all. And I almost forgot to tell you, when something in the house went sour with smell of damp corner, a musty cupboard, the inside of a barrel that had held something strong, my grandmother set out a shallow dish of dry wood ash and left it there. The ash drank the smell out of the air the way it drinks moisture out of a slug. A few days later, the corner was sweet again, and the dish went right back to the hearth. You do it the same way. An open bowl of cooled ash in a closed, musty space pulls the dampness and the odor out of it for nothing. No plastic tub of crystals, no spray that only covers one smell with another. And our chickens, I have not even told you about the chickens. In the corner of their run, there was always a low box of dry ash mixed with a little dust, and the hens would settle into it and shake and roll and throw it up through their feathers until they looked like they had been dipped in flour. We did not teach them that. They knew. The fine ash worked down to the skin and smothered the little mites and lice that torment a bird, the same drying, choking action that stops a slug. If you keep hens, set out a shallow box of dry wood ash in a sheltered, dry spot, and they will dust themselves clean all year, and you will never reach for a poison powder again. My grandfather called the ash box the cheapest farmhand he ever hired, because it worked every day and never once asked to be paid. That is the thing I want you to carry out of here tonight, more than any single trick. It was never about one clever use. It was about a whole way of seeing, looking at the thing in your hand that the world calls waste, and asking what it can still do, instead of asking what to buy to replace it. My grandfather saw a field's worth of lime in a cold bucket. My grandmother saw a shelf of cleaners in the same gray dust. They were not poor for lacking the store. They were rich because they did not need it. So when you carry your ash out this week, walk slow. Spread it thin. Draw your ring at dawn. Scrub your iron pot. Set your bowl in the musty corner and feel for a moment the weight of something handed down, passing through your own two hands now, onto whoever is watching you the way I once watched the men and women of my village. That is how it stays alive. Not in a book. In your hands and in the next pair after yours.